Only about 20% of businesses that want to sell, like they're actually raising their hand, I'm ready. Only about 20% of them actually are able to complete the transaction. And then of those, we've done our own surveys of these, only 12% of those owners that actually completed the sale were highly satisfied with the outcome. So you put that together, it's like 2.5% that start the process end up highly satisfied. Oh, by the way, how much of your personal life is being run through the business? Did you do that calculation? And after tax, what that's going to cost you lifestyle wise? The beauty of our tax code, and a lot of people believe, you need to find loopholes and you need to be really aggressive with the tax code to find ways to limit taxes on your sale. The reality is there's a lot of options.
There's a difference between a dream chaser and a dream catcher. Hey, everybody, and welcome to the Dream Catchers podcast. I'm your host, Jerome. Man, we flew out to the West Coast for this one. We've got Homer Smith with us from Convergent Wealth Partners. Homer's a private wealth advisor, and his practice works with founders, business owners who are exiting. They do planning prior to the exit, and then ultimately, once they get the liquidity event, most people need a little bit of help because that's more money than they've ever had in their bank account. And Homer's ready, willing, and able to help folks on the backside. So, we're going to talk about what most people focus on, which is the liquidity event, exit six in our framework of the eight exits of a founder, and what you can do to maximize the benefit of that liquidity event. Homer, welcome to the show, man. Good to see you.
Thank you so much for having me. Excited to have the conversation. Uh, I know the work that you do is so important, and see it, with all the owners that we help get to that point. And so, yeah, excited for the conversation and where it might go.
Man, it's going to be a phenomenal episode. Ladies and gentlemen, you better get your pen and pad out because Homer's going to give you some jewels today. So let's go right to the thing. You working with the founder, they get the check or they get the wire, whatever it is, it hits. You were riding with them along on the process or on the journey. How long are they really happy now that they got all of the liquidity?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think happy is a tough word to define. I think there's a lot more relief initially. I think I see a lot more relief in families that, you know, spent years building these businesses through multiple recessions, almost lost the business multiple times, um, constantly are battling mentally whether they want to sell the baby or not, and are they going to be able to mentally be okay at the end of it? And so it's interesting. Happiness, um, trying to think like happy really is the word, but I think relief is more often what I see from them more than happiness.
We got through the deal. The money's actually real.
Yeah,
All of these years of hard work, turmoil, stress,
yeah.
uh, and now we actually got the money in our account. Um, I
And one,
find it. Go ahead.
I was gonna say one story like just recently in particular, kind of to really nail that home was we worked with an egg farm of all types of businesses. A million hens, so think about a million eggs a day being processed on their farm. Um, But in the last couple of years, we've had this whole avian flu, bird flu going around. And in 2022, I believe, was a pretty bad year for that and kind of devastated a number of farms. And this was a fourth generation business. And they finally like, hey, like we're done. We've had a really good year. Prices were up because of that. They had their best year ever. Let's try to sell this thing and get out before the next wave hits. And so when they hired us, it's like as fast as we can, we want the best price, and we were able to help them get the transaction done in 5 months. And then
That's fast.
yeah, really fast. They got a really good price. Total value is about 75 million. And then massive relief because in this year, so we sold at the end of 23, and this year the flu's back, and a number of farms are getting hit again. And so every time we talk with them, again, I think they're happy in general, but the relief more than anything else to know that, and that's kind of an extreme case, for the relief side of things, but it's how important that transaction was for that family, and the timing of it was so critical, And so the process of getting him to the finish line and through the finish line and to the other side, you could just feel this huge just, and they're still in that kind of honeymoon phase around that at this point. But yeah, that was pretty satisfying to help them get to that.
Now, did they know what they were going to do next on the backside of the exit, or did they go
Uh,
into a void of nothing?
yeah, we talked about it, right? Ask them, what are you going to do? And the third generation, the older, the matriarch and patriarch of the family, they're a little bit older, so I think they're more in like retirement mode. The harder, tougher one that we're still working on, and he's still figuring out, was the son, who was basically operating the business. He's only in his 40s, and so he's the one that we're still trying to think through and help him think through what's next. And he's not there yet. I think he's okay taking a break. It was a pretty tough transaction and a lot of work heading up to it. And so, 9 months or so into a break at this point, but we know, and he knows, pretty soon he's gonna have to figure out what's next. And so that's kind of a big project coming up. How do we help him do that? So yeah.
So I'm taking my certified exit planner planning advisor exam tomorrow. So I can have another designation or certification. I'm not quite sure why I did it yet, but
Yeah.
when we were going through the content, one of the things that they brought up is getting the right professionals around you early in the process so
Yes.
that you have a more, I'll say, successful exit.
Yeah.
Um, so can we, I assume that you guys were already working with that family before they started the thought of exiting or selling their business. When is the right time for somebody like you to get involved in the process?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say so in this family in particular, we were actually brought in by the attorney about a month before we went to market. But they hadn't built a team yet, so we then ended up building the entire team for them. So it can happen fast. Ideally, it's at least a couple of years ahead of the sale because there's a lot of planning. You may be aware of a lot of these. I'm sure you are aware of a lot of these, but it's something we talk to business owners all the time about. Is only about 20% of businesses that want to sell, like they're actually raising their hand, I'm ready. Only about 20% of them actually are able to complete the transaction. Um, and then of those, we've done our own surveys of these, only 12% of those owners that actually completed the sale were highly satisfied with the outcome. So you put that together, it's like 2.5% that start the process end up highly satisfied. And there's two reasons in our view. One is lack of pre-sale corporate planning. So they didn't get the business really buttoned up, ready for sale, right? Financials were a mess. Management team wasn't capable of leading all those issues, which we don't deal with as much. Um, we really focused in on the personal pre-sale planning. So they didn't really understand what the value of the business was, especially after tax. So they didn't do any tax planning, didn't do any estate planning. Oh, by the way, how much of your personal life is being run through the business? Did you do that calculation? And after tax, what that's going to cost you lifestyle wise. So it's all these personal planning things. And so you put all those together. And so that's why I say 2 years is nice if we have a 2 year runway, because we can really then help them identify if there's people they need to bring in on the corporate planning side to make sure the business is as attractive as possible. And then on our side, do we do all the tax planning, estate planning, asset protection planning, and just the gap analysis to make sure they knew, okay, if you got the value of what this thing is worth, are you going to be okay? And are we going to be able to recreate your lifestyle without any stress afterwards? So the more time we have to do that, the better. So I'd say 2 years is ideal, 5 years more, and anything is better. But at the same time, you know, 6 months, we can make it happen. It's just a little bit more of a rushed process.
Yeah. And it required that compression of the schedule or the timeline requires more time for them in that period. And if
Yeah.
you're spreading it out over a couple of years, the time doesn't really seem like it's that a significant investment.
Yeah, and it limits the options. When you have 6 months, the corporate pre-sale planning is kind of limited of what you can do if you want to go to market like tomorrow. So again, the more time, the better.
So you said the T word, and I was going to try to save it to later, but you said taxes. So, I
Yeah.
mean, you got to pay taxes when you sell your business. What's up with that?
Yeah, maybe. So that's, there's the beauty of our tax code. And a lot of people believe, you need to find loopholes and you need to be really aggressive with the tax code to find ways to limit taxes on your sale. The reality is there's a lot of options that are right down the middle of the tax code. Just people aren't aware of them. A lot of CPAs aren't aware of them. Even, tax attorneys aren't always aware of all of them because it's such, I mean, how big is our tax code? It's massive. And so, our job for our clients is, maximizing the after tax outcome for them. And so again, that's why it's also beneficial to look further in advance because restructuring the business to certain structures can be a benefit depending on what type of business it is. Um, the estate planning component of it, there's lots of planning around estate planning that can limit the income tax, capital gains tax on the sale of the business. There's lots of asset protection structures that can also help with that. So there's a number of vehicles, again, right down the middle of the tax code, tried and true. You just need time to plan. You need someone to be able to translate. They're complex. And so a lot of times what I find with clients is, at the end of the day, if it's too complex, it's like, I'll just pay my taxes. I don't want to deal with the complexity. And especially if you have a truncated time frame to try to explain it to them because we got 2 months to do all of the planning, it's a lot harder. But if we got 2, 3, 4, 5 years, educating them, walking them through pros and cons over time, it's going to give them a much better chance to feel comfortable of the planning and be able to put things in place to dramatically change the outcome. And so, we've done it with I mean, we've done it in short time frames too. I mean, we had a business in California, a family that owned a 25% share of a C corporation. We were doing some family planning for them, and we identified this asset on the balance sheet. And it was like, well, what is this thing? Because most of their investments were real estate. And they said, oh, this was a business our father, this is generation two we're speaking to. Our father like forgave a loan to his best friend in like the mid 70s for $25,000, and he gave him like 25% of the business. Like, oh, that's interesting. So like, what's it worth now? Like, well, we're not 100% sure, but I think they're going to market and I think they want to sell for like 80 to 100 million. Like, oh, that's kind of a big deal. Like, split it three ways, after tax, it's not a ton, but it's worth planning for. Like, why don't you introduce me to the investment banking group that's doing the deal just so I can get a better understanding? Well, it wasn't like 100 million, it was 425 million that they were thinking they were going to be getting an LOI for in about a week. And the way that the business, because it was a C corporation and they weren't, involved in the business, we could do some quick planning. We moved the trust from California to Nevada, and we were able to avoid over 10 million of income tax just by some quick planning. And so it can happen fast, but you need the exact right fact pattern to make that work. If it wasn't a C corp, couldn't have done that. Other structures wouldn't have worked either. So yeah, a lot of planning that happens, and I love saving clients money on taxes. They've worked hard in these businesses for years. They paid a ton of tax. If I can help them avoid some of it on the transaction, you know, get more in their pockets for their family causes they care about. Yeah, that's really what drives me around that.
That's fascinating how nonchalant they were about it.
Yeah, I think they were just so disconnected from it. Their dad was super close with the other family. They would get some updates from time to time, but they were busy running their real estate and their families, and it just wasn't something they paid a ton of attention to. And we see that all the time. It was just the business had never paid a dividend, so it wasn't like there was a lot of like ongoing things that the CPAs or other professionals were asking questions around. It was just kind of this thing sitting there in the background and to them, it's kind of like they look at it as like this is like winning the lottery. We never expected a dime from it, and now it's changed their lives. And so it was a pretty cool outcome for them.
So, one of the things that I became aware of when I was speaking at Entrepreneurs Organization at MIT a couple of weeks ago was how difficult it is for people in family businesses to decide whether to transition it to the next generation or exit.
Yeah,
And so it was interesting that you were mentioning that you were talking to Gen 2. So this would be the kids of the
yeah,
matriarch and the patriarch. Uh, Do you see people struggling when they're trying to decide what to do? And, are there any best practices you notice related to whether they should keep it or sell it?
Yeah, that's a great question. We do see that challenge. I think while still, I think a large majority of transactions do transition to the next generation, in a family business. I think that it's getting harder and harder depending on the type of business. And, because I think what happens a lot is, generation two sees their parents grinding, working their tails off for years and years and years. Again, the stress of almost losing the business multiple times. And they're like, and depending on the time frame of when the business got successful and financially the family was successful, is that drive there in generation two to want to do that? And they've got a decent life. Do I want to spend 70 hours a week building a business? And I've got young kids and we're doing pretty good. And so I think there's just a challenge of the mental side of it. And then I think that again, a lot of it depends on how well the planning was been done through the years for generation one or two, whoever is now taking it over. Like, are they financially independent of the business? Because that also changes the nature of, do they need something out of that? Do they need to stay attached to the business in some large financial way for themselves? And then how does that then impact the next generation? Because now they've got to make sure a whole bunch of the funding is going to mom and dad to pay for retirement, but then that means I can't grow the business. And so there are so many nuances to a family business that aren't there in other businesses because they don't have these family dynamics. What happens if only one of the family members is in the business, but two of them aren't? How does that work? Is everybody staying involved and getting a paycheck, or what's that dynamic look like as this thing keeps going, down? So I think it's just a willingness to roll the sleeves up and ask a lot of questions and spend time. And I think that's when we engage families for this type of planning, we tell them this is going to take 9 to 12 months minimum just to have the initial conversations, work through the plan, think through the options, and start the process. It could take 2, 3 years to really, depending on the dynamics of the family. And they're always like, it can't possibly take that long. Um, we make decisions. We'll be done with this in 3 to 6 months, and then next thing you know, we're 12 months in, and we're like just still scratching the surface of all the issues. So I think it's patience, it's time, but a willingness to have the conversations is important. And some, I would say, older generations still struggle with the openness and willingness to have like open conversations with generation two, generation three. And so, again, that impacts whether and how quickly we can get through and actually get to a good outcome for them.
And the openness is about what things are worth or what they desire. What is the openness?
Yeah, I think money, just talking money in general. I think dealing with the differences in their kids and trying to come to, equal or fair, what's right. And it could be different for each family. I also see things happen where we work with one family, very, very large real estate family. The patriarch's now in his 90s, and he created the business and created, a huge chunk of the wealth. Couple of his kids are involved in the business and have done really well. He's got a lot of kids. He's like 8 or 9 kids. Um, and two of them, and one in particular now runs the business and drives a lot of the value. And then there's like tons of grandkids. And he generally, from, his words, basically despises most of his kids and grandkids at this point. And it's because they're, basically living off of the wealth that he created and that his son has continued. And that, at generation three at this point, each of these grandkids is getting a pretty big check from family trusts every year. And so it's interesting, like, yes, it's a challenge, right? These people aren't motivated, they're happy getting these checks, but kind of the question from my end is, well, what did you do to pass not only this wealth down, but your values? Do any of them really understand what it took, and what kind of conversations have you had with them to help them really understand what this took to get here? And most families don't have those conversations. They just see the wealth. They don't see what it took to get there and the values that the family needed to have to get there. And none of that has been really passed down. And so, yes, there's some responsibility on those grandkids for the way they're living their lives. There's responsibility on generation two for how they raise them. At the end of the day, there's also responsibility at generation one for how they passed that down, right?
That,
And so again, the family dynamics is always a much more interesting, challenging conversation when there's, those kind of dynamics at play.
that's a hard conversation to have with that person. I mean, you got to have a relationship before you tell them that, because if you don't, they're just going to run the other way because
Yeah,
they just feel like they're being criticized.
yeah, 100%.
S- Now, one thing that I've noticed, and maybe it's coincidence, but maybe you'll be able to validate this for me, is for the families that build massive wealth, um, they have their own enterprise. Like you're not seeing people become deca millionaires with like um, companies that aren't family businesses. I'm seeing like more and more folks where the kids and it's multi-generation and each generation kind of continues to grow it, even though you got the cliche like the the first generation starts it, the second one grows it, and the third one destroys it. But like
Yeah,
if you can get through like that second and third and even fourth generation, like I'm seeing really wealthy families, not decamillionaires, but like centimillionaires, and some of
yeah,
them are going to billionaires. Is
yeah.
that accurate or?
I think I think there's survivorship bias potentially in that, yes, the ones that make it are very, very successful, but it's in the wake of a whole bunch of them that didn't. And so you're only seeing the most successful ones, right? Because I do think and we've done a lot of research around it and the whole like shirt sleeves in three generations, just like what you kind of described is,
Hey guys, as you might know, a very small percentage of the people who actually listen to this podcast are subscribers. So do us a favor, subscribe. In fact, we did some analytics and we found out that only 25% of the people who listen are subscribers. And our goal is to get that to about 75% over the next 3 months. So do us a favor, hit the subscribe button so you get notified when our new episodes. We plan to bring immense value to you guys going forward as we continue to improve the content that we create at Dreamcatcher. Your dreams should be real. Let's get back to the show.
founders create the wealth, generation two kind of keeps it, and then the third loses it. It's not only our society, but pretty much every society around the world has a phrase around that, and they see it, in every culture around the globe. And so it's not a phenomenon just to U.S. family businesses or family wealth. It's a global phenomenon. And so it's I think the families that make it and are those centimillionaire businesses are more the exception than the rule.
Well,
That's anecdotal. I haven't done like the full deep research on that, but that's my guess. Is that there's a lot of them though. So there's a lot of family businesses. So a number of them do make it to that, but I think a lot more of them putter out along the way.
yeah, I think it is a lot of it is just being able to survive, and then in their survival, there's consolidation, so they're grabbing
Yeah.
market share, and then um, there's a
Eh,
brand as well, right? And so the brand
yeah.
is there, and so people recognize it. And my parents went there, so maybe I should go there too.
Yeah, and I would guess those families, if you really research them, probably did a lot more work at generation one, generation two of those family dynamics and like really creating a lot more communication and opportunity and really a drive to bring the younger generations in and have a role in the family and the family business much earlier and were better communicators around it. I would guess that you would probably see that as a much more likely dynamic in those families.
And I might be reaching here, but do you see that as being the biggest like struggle or gap or overlooked thing that founders should be thinking about as it relates to getting ready to sell or exit?
The communication with the family.
Mhm.
Yeah, I would say it's a huge, well, I don't know specifically around the exit, but I think around because we talk about transition. Like, so when we talk to families, we say, what we're really known for more than anything else is helping our successful families and business owners navigate life's most important, challenging, and complex transitions. And whether that's, moving from owner operator to owner and taking a step back from the day-to-day operations, whether that's transitioning to the next generation, selling to outside. But then once they do leave the business, sell, whatever it is, how do we transition this wealth to the next generation in a way that's positive and impactful and not destructive? And so we do talk with them quite a bit about, okay, like where that shirt sleeves of shirt sleeves happens. Some of it's in the planning, yes. So if you don't do really good technical planning around your estate and structure things well, you can lose money to lawsuits and divorces and all those sorts of things. That's definitely a key factor. But just as important, if not more important, is the relationship with the family. And oftentimes there's one person who's the glue, and that everything looks, great on the surface because that one person's there. But when they're gone, all hell breaks loose and World War III starts within the family. And have they done any of the work? And so we talked to them about that. And like, so what does that look like? What roles do your kids and grandkids start to play? Because now you leave the family business, you sell, you have this liquidity event. What is the business now? What's the family enterprise? And what are people's roles? What does that look like now that it's not an operating business? Now it's an investment holding company, right? And we start to help them think through, what does the foundation look like? Do you have a family foundation? Is that an opportunity to teach the next generations about money and wealth and making good decisions and research and getting involved? And so we tell them and speak to the importance of those to help start to transition those values down and that work ethic down, and getting them involved in communicating. So yeah, I would say it's a pretty critical part to the process, post transition.
And it's not something that the wealth advisor is generally focused on because, while you need to understand their life, helping them figure it out is probably not the best use of your time.
Yeah. Yeah, I say we're good at telling them they need to focus on this. It's not a specialty of mine to help them actually, navigate, mentor them through that. That's definitely resources we would bring in from the outside to navigate that.
Okay. So we talked about taxes, we talked about communication. What else is like extremely important on the pre-exit side that's going to deliver a more favorable outcome for them?
Yeah, I think the estate planning component is extremely critical, and often connects with tax planning too, because there is some work to be done there. But again, the earlier we get involved, the better on that too. So they do think they're on a growth trajectory, and they're going to create a much larger estate. It's better to grow that outside of your estate, avoid 40% federal estate tax, and to leave it in your estate, and helping them think through and look at their family dynamics again and say, okay, how much control do you need on those assets outside of your estate? The good news, again, there's great solutions that are available for planning that they can effectively get their assets completely out of their estate, but still have a pretty good amount of at least indirect control over them. So it doesn't really feel like they've given away their assets and can't utilize them post transaction. So just helping them again think through the math, the complexities of it, giving them options. So we walk them through 4 or 5 different ways they could do this, pros and cons of each, um, and just in our goal optimize. And so the longer we have to do that planning, and the enough time before the sale, we can really make a tremendous difference, again, not only on the income tax side, but on the estate tax side. And, if the business goes up 20 million in the 2 or 3 years from when we start the planning to when they exit, it's an $8 million savings in estate taxes on just the value at the sale, not counting all of the growth that occurs on the proceeds from the sale over the rest of their lifetime. So it starts to become, very, very large dollars on the estate planning side, um, ahead of the sale. So tax planning, estate planning, and then asset protection is another thing we talk to our families a lot about. Uh, we speak to them about, wanting to become as unattractive of a target as possible for frivolous lawsuits, divorces, fraud, and that liquidity events, people are hunting and searching for people having liquidity events and going after those families. And we need to put a fence around you and make sure that you're structured in a way as best as possible to be that unattractive target. And so sometimes it's the way we structure the assets, sometimes it's the right types of liability insurance and other things that they need to have in place, how we structure their estate planning. So there's a lot of pieces that go into that, but that those three I think are pretty interconnected in the conversations we have: tax planning, estate planning, and asset protection planning.
Now, there were people who sat up and they said, I can get stuff out of my estate. What does that actually mean?
Yeah, so you know we do a lot of planning where in order to get it out of your state, you got to give it away effectively, which a lot of them are sitting back down like, I don't want to give it away. And especially depending on their age, right? So we work with older founders that are in their 60s, 70s finally selling. We work with founders in their 30s and 40s that are selling. And it's a different conversation. It's a different um, way of thinking depending on their age, because the older you are, the less likely you're going to need all of those assets, or at least you already know it. When you're younger, it's like, well, I'm not really sure what might happen over the next 30, 40 years. I don't know if I'm going to need it, so I don't want to give it all away yet. And a lot of them are very charitably inclined, and some of the best tax planning vehicles and estate planning vehicles are charitable structures, whether they're foundations, donor advised funds, other things. But when you're giving to a charitable structure, you really are giving it away, and with very, very minimal economic benefit coming back to you, for the most part. And so you really have to have charitable intent. You really have to be okay that those dollars are, for the most part, gone. And that, yes, you can use them to do good for the world, but they're not going to be a huge financial windfall for your family. Um, but there's other structures, other trust structures you can set up where you can gift these assets out of your estate, especially if you're happily married. The best planning is done with happily married couples because you can do a lot more planning with them. But you can set up trust structures out of the estate where you gift assets for the benefit of your spouse. They can do it for you. You set it up correctly. Assets are out of the estate, but you can still benefit from them. So that's just one example, but there's many other ways to do that. But you don't have to give up control, flexibility, use of those assets just because you've given them away. Again, there are good planning structures. You got to follow rules. There's lots of pieces that have to go into that. But then not only if you do it well for yourself and avoid estate taxes for you, you can also then set it up so that your kids and then their kids and then their kids never pay estate tax on the growth of that asset as well. And you can truly create generational wealth, and at least from a structural standpoint, give your family the best chance to keep the wealth going. Doesn't mean it will stay, but at least structurally, you've done as best you can to put the pieces in place for them.
Man, so these are money problems.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
always interesting when people don't have money. They say they have money problems, and that's not a money problem. Money problem is when you've got money and you either don't know what to do with it or you're worried about wasting it. And so, what you just described is a way that we can be more efficient
yeah.
with the resources that we've worked so hard to create. Um,
If you think
yeah,
about it, if you don't do good planning, and again, every family is different on the level of complexity they're willing to have. But you think about the business all year, every year, you're creating wealth, making money, and you're paying income taxes. And if you're doing well, you're paying income taxes at 40 to 50%. So every dollar you get, you're only getting 50 to 60 cents maybe on it. And then you're building the value of your business and you sell that and you pay another 20 to 35, 40%, depending on what state you're in. And if all those assets are then sitting in your estate and you die, you pay another 40% tax on that value that you created. And so that's where that shirt sleeve starts to happen, is if you don't do good planning, just taxes alone can eat up so much of the wealth, that it makes it harder for it to persist for multiple generations. So again, that structural part is really important, just to give your family the best chance. Yes, family dynamics can still destroy it, but at least we gave them a chance.
and I mean, literally, it's in a lot of ways paperwork. It's
Yeah.
having the right C corp or S corp. It's uh, where the assets sit from an ownership standpoint.
Yes.
It's not. like it's not a heavy lift if you're willing to get the right team involved in the process so
Yeah.
that they can guide you through. Because I know there's some people who set up trust because they read something on the internet and they do it wrong,
Yes.
and then they trigger all kinds of things when they get caught.
Yes.
And
Yeah. Yeah. I'd
that's
say
way
our
more expensive than
it's way
paying
more
somebody.
expensive to fix it, right? They always want to save money on the front end and not pay large fees. I would say, like, I think you're spot on that. It's the way I frame it is it's simple but not easy. It's a sim from our view, it's very simple to map out the design. The challenge can be is that depending on the wealth, it gets pretty complex, and being able to translate for a family, um, you know, interesting concepts around giving stuff away, but still having some level of ability to access it. They can get pretty complex. So just making sure they truly understand it when there's multiple trusts and multiple layers and multiple people involved. Again, it just I know we keep harping on it, but the more time we have to plan for that, walk them through their options, pros and cons, share stories from other families of how they've used it, benefited from it. The more time we have to do that ahead of a major event, at least they're going to have a better chance of evaluating it for themselves and determining whether it's a good fit. And what we always tell our families is a couple things. One, don't do anything unless you really understand it. Like, don't take my word for it, right? You need to really understand it. And that's a critical component of it. Um, And then what we believe, if we put all the options in front of you and we give you the pros and cons, educate you, you understand it, you created a massive amount of wealth and success. You can make good decisions. I'm very confident if we put all that in front of you in the right way, you're going to make the best decision for your family, whichever one it is. And we don't care. And so families will ask us, well, what would you do if you were us? I'm like, say, I'm not you. I can't answer that question. And because if I was you, I would probably make a very different decision based on my own values, beliefs, goals. And so I can't tell you what I would do. I can tell you what other families have done and why it worked for them or not, but I can't answer that question of what I would do if I was you.
And a lot of times when they're doing that, when they try to push that onto the advisor, it's because they don't feel competent to make the decision.
Yes.
And so that means they need to have some more education. And usually
Yes.
it's, well, what question don't you have an answer to that you need answers to in order to feel better about this? And I see it a lot, man, where they're overwhelmed, they're tired, they're
Yeah.
questioning whether or not they're doing the right thing. And out on top of it, they don't know what they're going to do afterwards. And it's
Yeah.
just like, uh, somebody just tell me what to do and I'll go do it. And it's like, yeah, that sounds good until you have to live with the consequences.
Yes. Yeah, I 100% believe that. And that's why we always tell families from the beginning, this can take 10 meetings. It might take 100 meetings to get to the right answer. And we'll do whatever it takes to get to the right answer for you. But we're not going to cut corners. We're not going to, do things that are going to potentially lead to that outcome, right? You still might decide, you might make the best decision for you today. And then 2 or 3 years later, decide, change your mind. But it was at the time the best decision for you. But it's not going to be because you just, to your point, said try to take the easy way out and get my opinion or somebody else's opinion on it. So that's I think a really important point on that.
Yeah. Man, we're gonna have to bring you back because there's more that we could talk about related to this. And I mean, we've really only talked about one family today, but I know you've got a whole lot more stories that we can dig into. Homer, I guess I got two final questions for you. And the first one is, who do you think should be a guest on the show? I mean, based on what we've talked about, it seems like you've got an amazing network of folks who are helping people exit. And I'm sure they've got stories and perspectives,
Yeah.
or even families who have exited, who, would be willing to come on and share, the good and the bad of it so that other folks who are going on this journey, one, will not feel alone, and those who haven't gotten to the liquidity event will know kind of what to think about or watch out for.
Yeah. I think having successful families that have exited, and I say successful, I mean the exit was successful.
Mhm.
Um, all the other stuff they're dealing with. I think that would be, especially with you and what you do for them, for families, I think it would be super interesting to have, post exit business owners on, and get their experience, right? I can share my experience,
Yeah.
and I can share like secondhand what I think they went through. Because I've talked, obviously we talk with them all the time about what they were thinking through the process, but I think getting firsthand, you know, stories is so valuable for other owners who are thinking about their exit, right? And so I think that's critical. Yeah, I think there's a number of other professionals that are pretty heavily involved in the process that could give pretty decent insights if they're especially if they're pretty close to the family along the way. Um, eh, but maybe a little biased. I think that, there's certain types of professionals that are like close to tend to be like at the center of the process for the family. And sometimes it's their attorney, sometimes it's their CPA, sometimes it's their wealth manager. I think the wealth manager, if they're focused on exit planning, if they're focused on being that, personal CFO, just happen to be in the best position because of the nature of our our jobs for them. CPAs, tend to be super busy around just making sure the compliance is done well, and that the books are great, everything there to then be involved in all of the other meetings that go around the transaction is a challenge. Same thing with the attorneys, and so we tend to play probably the biggest role during the transaction. So we're the ones they're tending to call at 8 p.m. on Sunday, when something's just not feeling right, or a deal term changed and they're really upset and they're not sure how it's going to impact them, or we just got off a call with the investment banker and the attorneys and they have no idea what just happened, and what terms they were speaking about is all legalese, and I'm needing to spend an hour with them and just translate the hour-long meeting we were just on, and so I find we're often in the best position to do that.
Mhm.
Um, and so we get a lot of the best insights. But again, I think that, all the other professionals play extremely critical roles. I guess long-winded answer to say, I think business owners would be great, to get ongoing stories and insights from, because every exit's so different,
Yeah.
and every process is so different. That would be, I think, really neat to see and hear.
What was really cool is last week's episode we had Omani, I think he's formerly known as Ron Carson, on, and he
Yeah,
talked about selling a minority interest in his business that was valued at $1 billion. And
yeah,
so, having those conversations with people who kind of sit on both sides of the fence because um, they run a wealth management company.
yeah.
Um,
Aaron's a very interesting dude. Yeah,
so the final question I have for you, man, is what's the one thing you want listeners to take away from this episode? Because we've covered a whole lot of ground.
yeah. I think, and it's probably nothing new that they've heard before, but it is so important because there's so much more that can be done. Is you really should start the process of not only the financial side of this, but the mental side too. So the stuff that you do that's so important, because I don't remember all the stats on it, but I just know that there's, a lot of research out there of not just business owners, but just even retirees
Mhm.
that don't have that purpose. They don't know what's going to keep them busy and active once they retire. Their life expectancy is much lower. And all this years and energy and time they spent building this wealth, saving for retirement, only to, you know, die within a couple of years of that event. It's just not good. It's not right. And so, the earlier you can start on the personal and corporate pre-sale planning, and included in that, especially the personal pre-sale planning, is what is it that you're going to do, once you're done with this, and dealing with that existential crisis that you speak so much about. um, do it early, do it 5 years, 10 years in advance, and don't just think of it as a, hey, I'm ready to raise my hand and so let's build a team and do this. You really need time. That's going to be
Yeah.
the most important component to it.
Time is the game, and I thought that was where you would go. I don't think they can hear it too many times
Yeah,
because it's not a 6 month process. Even if you're well organized and you've got great books, it's not
yeah,
a 6 month process.
yeah,
This is a strategic initiative, and it's probably one of the most important things that you're going to do over the course of your career. and it's
Yes.
probably got one of the biggest financial impacts on your family out of
Yes.
all of the things that you're going to do. And so I think the worst thing you can do is rush it and force it and get into a position where you don't get optimal results as a result of exiting. Homer, you're a dream catcher. You're helping other people catch their dreams. I really appreciate you coming on the show and sharing your experiences and those of your clients.
Thank you, Jerome. It's been a pleasure. And yeah, just it's been a great experience for me as well. Thank you.
Yeah, man. To our listeners, your dreams should be real. We'll catch you on the next episode.